Hi everyone, thanks for coming back. I'm sorry it's taken me so long to get back into this table. I've just been really busy with other things, and I'm going to try to get through this as quickly as possible because I have some other tables that are really exciting that I would like to share after I'm through with this series of videos on pictures and the Bible codes. So I want to try to complete going over this as quickly as I can so I can get into those other tables. And the last table that I was on was this one over here, which is on Enoch and Elijah. And I had just finished explaining in my last video how there was a direct link between Zechariah 3, where you see Joshua clothed with filthy garments, and then the angel says to take away the filthy garments and to clothe him with a change of raiment. And there is a direct link with the word raiment because when you look in the Greek, you see that this word is a word that means a garment down to the foot, and it's used only one time in the New Testament, and that is in Revelation 1:13. As you can see here, you can see that this word means reaching to the feet, and you see that it's only used one time in the New Testament, and that's in Revelation 1:13, where it talks about Jesus standing in the midst of 7 candlesticks. And then when you go to Zechariah 3, when you go to the next chapter, you see that it talks about the 7 candlesticks. So this is a direct link in the Old Testament to the New Testament that gives you an indication that what's being talked about here in Zechariah 3 is prophetic of Jesus in the end times in the book of Revelation. And also, once you get to Revelation 1:3, you see, or Revelation 1:13, you see that the 7 candlesticks, that it explains later in verse 20, that the 7 candlesticks represent the 7 churches. So you get an understanding of what the candlesticks represent in the book of Revelation. They represent the 7 churches. And when you go back to Zechariah 4, you'll see that there's a direct link there as well to the New Testament, and that's actually in verse 14, where it talks about the 2 anointed ones. Over here in the Hebrew, it actually translates as the 2 sons. This word right here, this word ben, means sons of the oil. This word in the Hebrew, I believe it's pronounced Yitshar, refers to a fresh oil, a shining, pure oil. And when you look at the Septuagint, you'll see that it uses another word for this oil, because in the Hebrew there's more than one word for oil. There's just regular oil, but then there's also this fresh, shining, pure oil. And apparently there's no word in the Greek to describe that. So instead of using the word oil in the Greek, when I was looking at this years ago, I noticed that they used another word, and this word actually means quality in the modern Greek. But when you look at the concordance, you see that that word is used only one time in the New Testament as well. And that takes you to Romans 11:17, where this word was translated as, well, over here they've translated it as richness, but in the King James it's translated as fatness. So I'll show you that verse in the Blue Letter Bible. So we'll go to Romans 11:17. And you see that word right here. It's a word that was translated as fatness. And it says, if some of the branches were broken off, and thou being a wild olive tree, were grafted in among them, and with them partakest of the root and the fatness of the olive tree. So it's, over here it's translated as fatness, and it's talking about the pure shining oil, as we saw in Zechariah 4, that both, the two sons, it talked about the two sons of the oil, and as you see here, it says, these are the two sons of the oil that stand before the God of the whole earth. And then when you go to Romans 11, you see that it's the two branches of the two olive trees, the wild olive branch and the natural branch that was cut off and grafted back in, that these are the two branches that partake of the root and the fatness of the olive tree. So there's a direct link with the word fatness that links the Old Testament, the two anointed ones, the two olive trees of the Old Testament, to Romans 11 in the New Testament. And another important thing to point out is that this word over here, partakest, is actually a word that means joint partner. If you notice, it has this prefix, which is this word right here. This is actually a prefix, it's not really a word, and it means with or together. So they partake together with the Jews from the root and the fat of the olive tree. So this is a future event. This actually occurs once the outpouring of the Holy Spirit takes place, because you see in Romans 11 it talks about all Israel being saved, and I believe when it's talking about all Israel being saved, that is talking about both the Jews and the Gentiles. And then when you go to Joel 2, it talks about God's Spirit being poured out on all flesh. Well, all flesh doesn't necessarily mean everyone in the whole world. It's just talking about God's people. Because if you go to Joel 2, where it talks about the Holy Spirit being poured out on all flesh, you see that just before that it says, and ye shall know that I am in the midst of Israel, and that I am the Lord your God and none else, and my people shall never be ashamed. So it's talking about God's people and God being in the midst of Israel. And in the end times, we know that Israel is spiritual Israel. So it's made up of both Jews and Gentiles. The Jews that have been redeemed, that it talks about in Romans 11, that will take place once the blinders are removed, and the Gentiles that have been grafted in to the original olive tree. And I believe that both of these events take place at the same time, because when you look at the word fullness, I know that a lot of people like to talk about the fullness of the Gentiles, that Israel is blinded until the fullness of the Gentiles comes in. People often quote that, but the book of Romans also talks about another fullness that must take place, and that's the fullness of the Jews. So you see here in Romans 12, it says, now if the fall of them be the riches of the world, and the diminishing of them the riches of the Gentiles, how much more their fullness? And then it goes on to say, for if the casting away of them be the reconciling of the world, what shall the receiving of them be but life from the dead? So it's not until Israel is redeemed that we can pass from life, from the dead to life. This is the time of the resurrection. And I also want to talk about the number 11, because if you go to Ezekiel 37, well, first of all, I just want to say that the number 11 looks like two sticks, as in two candlesticks or two olive trees. But then when you go to Ezekiel 37, it actually talks about two sticks, and I just want to show you that. And this happens, this is where it talks about the valley of the dry bones. So it happens right after the resurrection. I know that, you know, people teach that this is referring to Israel becoming a nation, which may be one layer of meaning to this prophecy, but I think it's primarily talking about the resurrection. And then it goes on to talk about two sticks, and you see that over here. It says, "Moreover, thou son of man, take thee one stick and write upon it for Judah, and for the children of Israel, his companions. Then take another stick and write upon it for Joseph, the stick of Ephraim, and for all the house of Israel and his companions, and join them one to another into one stick, and they shall become one in thine hand." So the two sticks become one. And we see in Zechariah 4:11 that we have 4 objects, but it's really just 2. And the same thing in Revelation 11:4. There's 2 candlesticks and 2 olive trees, but it's really 2 witnesses. And that's because the 2 have become one. Each stick is both a candlestick and an olive tree. And over here it talks about the 2 sticks being joined together. And it's talking about the 2 houses of Israel, which is a theme throughout the Bible. But if you look at the word Ephraim, you'll see that the word Ephraim actually represents the Gentiles. And I'm not sure if it's evident in this meaning over here, but it's evident in Genesis 48 when I believe it was Isaac gave the blessing to Manasseh and to and to Ephraim and Manasseh. And he actually gave the blessing of the firstborn to Ephraim, even though Manasseh was born first. And then Joseph had to correct him. And it says, "And Joseph said unto his father, They are my sons." Okay, let me find that verse. Hold on one second. Okay, right here it talks about Israel, which is Jacob, giving the blessing to Ephraim and Manasseh. And Joseph had brought his 2 sons to Israel for the blessing. And it says, "And Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand toward Israel's left hand, and Manasseh in his left hand toward Israel's right hand, and brought them near unto him. And Israel stretched out his right hand and laid it upon Ephraim's head, who was the younger, and his left hand upon Manasseh's head, guiding his hands wittingly, for Manasseh was the firstborn. And he blessed Joseph and said, God, before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac did walk, the God which fed me all my life unto this day, and the angel which redeemed me from evil, bless the lads, and let my name be named on them, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth." And when Joseph saw that his father had laid his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, it displeased him, and he held up his father's hand to remove it for Ephraim's head unto Manasseh's head. And Joseph said unto his father, Not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put thy right hand upon his head. And his father refused, and said, I know it, my son, I know it. He also shall be a people, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations. So it's talking about his seed becoming a multitude of nations. So Ephraim represents the Gentiles, and the blessing was given to him first. And I'm about out of time, so I'm going to have to continue in the next video. Thanks.